I think that a lot of my Jewish friends and people that I work with on October 7th we were devastated and broken, but I think a lot of us also had some hope that the world will finally understand what we are dealing with and what we are fighting against. The brutality and the levels of targeted attacks on civilians to inflict pain on civilians, on babies, on girls, kidnapping babies and young girls really was supposed to show the world the enemy that we're fighting with. And instead, many people were actually celebrating this, characterizing it as Gaza breaking through and showing the world that they have strength. And then quite quickly, it turned into calls to make Israel stop the fire. When we're hearing ceasefire, it's not about both sides stopping the fire. It's not about releasing the hostages. It's at least not the way that it's being presented in the West. It's all calls for Israel to stop its rescue mission. And on top of that, we know that every time there's a war in Israel, Jewish people around the world pay the price. As someone that lives in London, I see it daily. I see the protests. I see the Palestinian flags. I see the over 1 million people going to those marches that we can debate whether or not they're violent. In my eyes, to call for a genocide of people is violent. I don't think anyone in any Israeli protest was calling for genocide of Palestinians. But those protests themselves are really triggering and creating fear among Jewish people in the West. And it's I think that this, coupled with the response, the international response from some world leaders, is been probably one of the most in volume has been the highest I've ever seen.
So with the IDF putting out content every single day with people like yourselves speaking out, activists speaking out, certain media explaining what Hamas is, why is there still such a level of ignorance, such a rise in anti-Semitism? Is this information penetrating?
I think that it is penetrating some people that are open to hearing it. But in an age of social media, when everything can be posted and shared, there's not really any way to verify tweets or posts of any random accounts, and knowing that Qatar and Iran and Russia invested a lot of money into social media. It's been a focus of them for a long time. And we're seeing that there's a lot of preparation on the anti-Israel side to target people that have impressionable minds, that are able to that are susceptible to this sort of propaganda, and they are hearing messaging that has been tailored to them. It's the messaging around Gaza has been really brilliantly crafted by sinister actors. And I think that's why so much of the volume of the conversation is so biased. And young folks on TikTok and on Instagram are receiving influx of misinformation. I mean, the fact that Hamas is calling for the genocide of all Jews, and then Israel is the one being blamed of genocide, or that Hamas is calling to, again, kill all Jews, and then people call Israel a Nazi state. Hamas has released all the footage. They called for violence. They continue this war for so long, and yet Israel is the one that is continuously being held accountable in this campaign, again, with all of those actors that are being joined by progressive activists, which is really horrific to see people that fight for LGBTQ rights supporting the side that is actually anti-LGBTQ. And the same with women rights movements and Black folks that would otherwise, I mean, if they go to Gaza, they would face insane amount of racism. I've been to Gaza, I've been to the West Bank. I served there as an officer for 5 years working with Palestinians. I do think that Palestinians deserve every right and they deserve to be protected. But how can they not see the amount of racism and hatred and homophobia that is spread throughout the West Bank and the Gaza Strip by Palestinians, and still hold the belief that they should support this side over Israel, which is a liberal democracy. So all of this is to say there's a massive campaign, and there's a lot of people that are really, I think, good-hearted, and they're just falling to this propaganda and to the images that are being sent directly to them, tailored to them with messaging that would work on them. And that's why we're seeing it as bad as it is.
That's a very eloquent explanation of the problems on social media. But why are we seeing still such a naivety in some newsrooms' dissemination of information that they're receiving on the ground from Gaza, from Hamas, essentially, and passing it off as fact? Why is that still such an issue for the likes of the BBC, etc.?
I think there is a correlation between the conversation on social media. We know that journalists use Twitter and they want to get more viewership. I'm reminded of many of the tweets of Piers Morgan, a very permanent journalist, saying that it's all about how many people engage with his social media content and how many viewers he gets. And it seems like if you go on social media, I don't think it's a reality, but it seems like if you are promoting anti-Semitic ideas, you're getting more clicks. And it's the same with newsrooms. And I think that there's also this general narrative that has been built in newsrooms and in media in the West, that Israel is the aggressor and that the Palestinians will always be the ultimate victim. And I think that after October 7th, when the news broke from Israel, even then, I mean, on the first days of the war on October 7th, I haven't seen the media really reporting it fairly. The coverage on the atrocities that happened to Israelis was always coming with some caveat of this is what the IDF is reporting, this is what Israel is reporting, as if they would lie. I mean, this is a democratic state that has checks and balances. There's people that, I mean, Israelis have been protesting in the streets against the government for a year. To say that, or to equate Israel to the leadership of the Palestinians in Gaza, which is Hamas, or to give it the same, fair treatment in the eyes of the media, and to believe immediately what Hamas is saying and the numbers that they're saying. I mean, Hamas hasn't reported of any terrorist casualty. We know that Hamas is wearing civilian clothes in Gaza. We know that they're not identifying themselves. They're actually shooting from hospitals, and the media is completely ignoring it and trying to look the other way because it serves this narrative that has been built for so long, I think, in international media, that the Palestinians are the oppressed and that Israel must be the oppressor. And I think they couldn't hold themselves on October 7th to shift back to this narrative. I've seen it on so many channels in the BBC, in other places, where in the Guardian, articles of thought leaders that if they spoke this way about any other minority group, they would be canceled in this country. But it seems like this anti-Semitism and this idea that Israel must be at fault is the one thing that sells papers. And we know how the media works, and that's why they continue pushing this narrative. And there are a few examples that are honest, but by and large, I think that's a bigger problem in the way that Israel is being presented as this white aggressor, and the Palestinians are those brown oppressed people.
That's the view, I guess, of how things are from the outside looking in. Inside Israel, the sense is that almost everyone appears to be united in the determination to get rid of Hamas. But beyond that, there is differentiation in opinion on what is the best way of getting hostages back, what should happen in terms of an intelligence failing report, and what next for Netanyahu and the Israeli government. Just give us a sense of that, where you see those differing opinions.
Yes, Israel over the last year, even more than that, has been under internal political turmoil where Israelis have different opinions. I mean, even within the government, there were different opinions. Criticism of the government has been widespread, and of Netanyahu's government specifically. Netanyahu himself has been the target of many of those protests, and hundreds of thousands of people came out to the streets. And Israel is a tiny country of 7 million people. That when hundreds of thousands of people go out to the street, it's quite big. And they went out to protest almost every Saturday. And when the war started, I think in Israel, there was some understanding that we all must come together right now and put our political differences aside, because we are facing an existential threat. And back then, there were over 200 hostages, and we have to do everything we can to release them and process the grief. I read that the national security in Israel awarded over 40,000 Israelis with benefits as victims of terrorism, and that's a massive number. I think in all of the recent wars, there was only 9,000 people that were considered to be victims of terrorism. So to have 40,000 people, Israelis, that have been victims of this violent is just so great. I think that's why so many Israelis came together. There was an understanding that we have this shared faith, and we have to come together to save ourselves and our country. And I think as time went by, we've heard more and more politicians making statements. You know how politicians are. It's no different in Israel than it is in the UK or in the US. A lot of politicians make statements that are very upsetting or trying to make the news in Israel as well. So we heard terrible statements that Israelis were standing against. I think within the government, the coalition that was built in the war, which include Benny Gantz, which was in the opposition, one of the biggest parties of the opposition, he decided to join in the war cabinet and agree to create a unity government just so they can manage the war. But in recent weeks, we've seen this crumbling a bit with some of the leaders of the current government, but that have been there from the beginning, like Itamar Ben-Gvir, which is a radical right-wing politician that has made a lot of statements. Even there was a whole debate now of who's going to be appointed as the head of the police, and that has been something that there was disagreement, and both sides were, both Benny Gantz from the opposition that is now part of the coalition disagrees with Ben-Gvir, and then Netanyahu was part of it. So there's a whole internal political issue that I think in the beginning of the war, they were able to put this aside. And I think as the war progresses, it's becoming more and more prevalent. And even about the hostages and how to conduct the war, some of the hostage families are saying that maybe stopping the war and agreeing to whatever Hamas conditions would be the best way to approach it. Some hostage families are saying you need to go on and just finish Hamas and not stop until Hamas is completely eradicated. And when the 3 hostage were killed in Gaza by the IDF, it was a big tragedy in Israel. And I heard an interview with the mother of one of the hostages, Iris Chaim, the mother of Yotam, and she was just brilliant. She was saying how it's not the fault of the soldiers, how she understands that the enemy is Hamas, and that she can't even imagine what they have went through. So those voices are still part of the society, but there is a vibrant debate within Israel because it is a democracy.
How confident are you that the IDF and the government is currently on the right course and doing the only method it can think of to get those hostages back?
If I was a TikTok influencer, I would probably tell you with full certainty that I know exactly what the solution is and what my thoughts are and why my thoughts are absolutely correct. But the truth is that the reality, as someone that served in the army for so long and has been working with international organizations, with Palestinian civilians, has been part of fighting for peace in Israel, I know that the reality is much more complicated and there's much more nuance. I know that the leaders are getting advice by top experts, that the IDF is doing everything they can, because I have friends that are commanders and top generals in the IDF that I'm speaking to on a daily basis, or some of them that are in Gaza that I can speak to. But I trust that they're doing everything they can to bring the hostages. Speaking to them, I know that for a lot of them, while they are very angry and upset with what Hamas has done to us, the main objective is to bring back the hostages and do everything they can to bring them back. And the truth is that when Israel agreed to a ceasefire, Hamas broke the ceasefire. Yes, they released a few hostages, but then they went back. They continued shooting since 15 minutes into the ceasefire. And now when Israel proposed another ceasefire through Egypt, that Egypt supported and Qatar supported, they still said no. So I think the truth and the fact is that that Hamas has shown us is that only if they are being pressured, they would agree to release hostages. And I think that's what the IDF is focusing on right now, is to put pressure on Hamas. And I've heard some interesting ideas coming out in Israel from some politicians saying that maybe if the IDF would just pull back and will close the border with Gaza, that would pressure Hamas. I'm not sure that this is the way. I mean, I think that Israel still has responsibility for the human lives. Maybe we shouldn't have, but I think we do have. That's the reality. So we can't just let the Gaza Strip being under blockade and not allow any humanitarian aid there. But I think that right now the operation of the IDF on the ground is really a rescue mission more than a war. I think that the focus is really to do everything they can to bring the hostages. But that's just my belief from my experience.
Since the most recent ceasefire in which Hamas released a number of hostages, what do we know now that we didn't know then about their experiences, and how much more concerning has that made things?
Definitely more concern. Some of the testimonials from the hostages have not been made public, but we know that many of the girls that have been and the women that have been released spoke about rape. There were some victims of rape that, because of the confidentiality of the medical files and the request by the hostages not to, the released hostages not to share this information, it's still kept in Israel. And I think that's Israel is doing the right thing by not releasing this information and making it public. But some of what we can discuss is that hostages have been sexually assaulted by Hamas on October 7th and after October 7th and in captivity. We know from one hostage that went on record, a mother that was held with her children, that during their captivity they met other hostages, and those were young girls that told them that they've been sexually assaulted. We know that food is very limited. All of the hostages came back with several, after they lost a lot of weight, they don't have access to medicine. A few of the hostages that were shot by Hamas on October 7th were operated by, one of them was operated by a veterinary without being, with full unconscious. She was going through an operation which was horrific. We heard that a kid was held hostage, was forced to watch the videos of October 7th, the horrific videos of the violence, and just to be in captivity for over 80 years, be it underground or in wherever it is, by people that have committed such horrific atrocities is just terrible. We also know that the United Nations teachers were participating in holding Israelis hostages. There were doctors, Palestinian doctors, that held hostages as well in their homes. There were doctors that were part of bringing the hostages in to Al-Shifa Hospital on October 7th, according to cameras from Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza. So the situation is critical, and I think that's what I'm hearing from the families that I speak to quite often. The families of the hostages, every minute is critical. They're beyond worried. There's no way to describe. I mean, a lot of them don't sleep. They barely eat. They just think about their families. I heard today in Israeli radio about Agam. Agam was a 19-year-old violinist from Israel that was kidnapped, and her father was interviewed, and he said, I'm hearing about all the stories of the rape, and all I'm thinking about is that Agam is one of the youngest girls that are held by Hamas for over 80 days, and I'm broken. And he sent her a message, and it's so horrific to think what these families are going through. We really need to do everything we can to bring them home.
Intelligence will be a key part of making that happen. In terms of the Israeli intelligence community, what are you hearing in terms of its desire and ability to get at the Hamas leadership, Sinwar, etc.?
Yeah, Sinwar and Mohammed Daf have been the top priority of Israel intelligence. both the intelligence from the Israeli side of the technological part of the intelligence operations, but also within Gaza, they've put a bounty on their heads, asking Palestinians to provide any information for and to be compensated for it. They have been, I mean, that has been the main focus of Israel to bring those leaders, because we know that they are the ones responsible. They are the ones that sent out the men on October 7th and really orchestrated this massacre in the way that it is. And the belief is that if Sinwar and Mohammed Daf would be taken, then it would give a lot of comfort and would be a big step forward in ending the war.
How long can Israel continue this military operation in Gaza, whilst also keeping an eye on other fronts? Lebanon, the West Bank potentially is in a serious situation. The Houthi rebels in the Red Sea. There's a lot to potentially confront, and even economically, this is a massive undertaking for Israel as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think that Israel is fully aware of it, and the leadership is aware of the financial, but also the security risk. We're seeing multiple fronts that are being fought throughout this war, specifically the northern one with Hezbollah and the Houthis from Yemen, which are not just affecting Israel, it's also affecting international trading. I think that's why America and the UK and other countries have shown interest in stopping the Houthis, the terrorist group in Yemen. And of course, we know that there are other players in the region that would want to join this war. And I think they're not joining because it doesn't benefit them at this point. But to name a few, Iran has been sending a lot of threatening messages to Israel. And we know that they've been supportive of Hamas financially and otherwise. And Turkey today, Erdogan was making a statement that Israel is committing a genocide. I mean, that's or calling Netanyahu rather Nazi or Hitler. And this is coming from Recep Erdogan, that is refusing to acknowledge the Armenian genocide, where over 1 million people were killed. But I think all of this is just showing how delicate in this region is, and we know that America has been one force that has held Israel from going into a multi-front all-out war, and I think that's positive. I don't think Israel is in a place that we can go into a war with other countries, or I mean, of course we can defend ourselves, but I think the focus of Israel right now is Gaza, to release the hostages and to end Hamas. And I think that to do that, it will require a few more months. That's what the leadership of the Israeli army and the security leaders have said in the last few weeks, that they think that it will take at least 2 or 3 months to finish the operation and to release the hostages and to find an alternative to leadership in Gaza, which cannot remain Hamas after October 7th. So I think we are heading towards at least until March, continuing this operation to release the hostages and to end Hamas in Gaza.